The end of chapter wrap-up, questionable life advice summary tradition continues. Lobster stands are advised to use the chapter markers to skip this part. Let us commence. Computers are basically magic and only work because of the social contract. Because when we use tools, our sense of self adapts to include those tools. We are also part of larger interconnected social wholes. Chaos ensues when things go wrong. Chaos ensues when a marriage breaks down due to infidelity. And through a large series of maybes and ifs, the infidelity was the fault of the cheated upon wife. When things go pear-shaped, assess if it's your fault. Because, according to Peterson, there's at least a 50% chance it's your fault. Because you're horrifically awful. And finally, language determines reality. So, let's see how Peterson brings this precise language train into the order station. This video made possible thanks to the continuing support of viewers, patrons, and PayPal pals like you. Thanks! Hi, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm a cognitive psychologist who, for some reason, has been going through Jordan B. Peterson's 12 Rules for Life and Antidote to Chaos with a science-tooth comb. And the end is in sight for this chapter, so let's review the visual cues before jumping right into it. This means I'm paraphrasing the book, and this means I'm giving my interpretation or opinion. Alrighty, let's see if Peterson was hiding all of the precision in the last sections of this precise language chapter. Can't even make it one sentence into this section.
The psyche, the soul, and the world are both organized at the highest levels of human existence with language, through communication. Things are not as they appear when the outcome has been neither intended nor desired. Being has not been sorted into its proper categories when it is not behaving. When something goes wrong, even perception itself must be questioned, along with evaluation, thought, and action.
This may be calling back to one of Peterson's claims from Rule 9. Assume that the person you're speaking to knows something that you don't. The idea was basically that you need to communicate with others because you probably aren't sophisticated enough to sort out your thoughts by yourself. I didn't like this claim then, and I don't like it now. Needing to bounce an idea off of someone doesn't mean that you're an unsophisticated thinker. Getting an outside perspective can be helpful. In this context, I would contend that our mind, assuming that's what he means by psyche or soul, isn't solely organized through language. It's part of how we process and organize things, sure, but it's not the only way. And how many categories would being have, Peterson? Would it happen to be a small, even number that rhymes with boo? Also, being can apparently misbehave now. Some precision for what he means and how perception must be questioned would be neat. I imagine it's along the lines of what we talked about in part 3, with the wife questioning her self-percept after seeing her husband out with another woman, but it'd be useful to have an explicit link here. Although, in the context of the sentence, I'm not so sure of that. So many dragons in this chapter.
When error announces itself, undifferentiated chaos is at hand. Its reptilian form paralyzes and confuses. But dragons, which do exist, perhaps more than anything else exists, also hoard gold. In that collapse into the terrible mess of uncomprehended being lurks the possibility of new and benevolent order. Clarity of thought, courageous clarity of thought, is necessary to call it forth.
When error announces itself. Huh? Again, I have to assume this at least partially relates back to the hypothetical couple from the last part, but this certainly could have been said more precisely. Dragons apparently exist. Maybe more than anything else. I've said it before, but sometimes the metaphor's ending and reality's beginning gets a little hazy. I'm going to assume that this courageous clarity of thought is referring to the potential truth described earlier in this chapter, that the hypothetical relationship was ending because they're bad people.
The problem itself must be admitted to, as close to the time of its emergence as possible. I'm unhappy. It's a good start. Not, I have a right to be unhappy, because that is still questionable at the beginning of the problem-solving process. Perhaps your unhappiness is justified under the current circumstances. Perhaps any reasonable person would be displeased and miserable to be where you are. Alternatively, perhaps, you are just whiny and immature. Consider both at least equally probable, as terrible as such consideration might appear. Just exactly how immature might you be? There's a potentially bottomless pit, but at least you might rectify it if you can admit to it.
Starting with the good. Peterson is allowing for the space for people to grow. Awesome. Less awesome is the gatekeeping of who gets to be unhappy. You must be at least this mature to be unhappy. I wouldn't say people aren't allowed to be unhappy. Some people may be unhappy as a consequence of things they did, and they might be unhappy because of a whole host of other reasons. There's tons of reasons to be unhappy. This instruction to consider that you may be immature is in line with the advice we saw in previous chapters, telling readers to be insanely responsible and take the blame for shit going sideways, that they're too ignorant to protect themselves, or even that the reader is horribly imperfect from this chapter. I would urge caution and balance in this. Don't automatically assume that it's equally probable that your immaturity caused whatever's making you unhappy as whatever else could be causing it. Getting in the habit of automatically assuming the worst about yourself in these things is a hard habit to break. Finally, this advice makes it seem like Peterson thinks that we wouldn't be taking into account our own role in our unhappiness. And sure, some people are critically lacking self-awareness and wouldn't take responsibility for their own unhappiness. But people exist on the other end too, who take far too much responsibility for things going wrong in their life and their unhappiness and everything else. Like, hello, depression. So yes, take an honest assessment of why you're unhappy, but don't just jump to assuming that it's because of you and your fault. Keep in mind that something not making sense isn't always the fault of the reader.
We parse the complex, tangled chaos and specify the nature of things, including ourselves. It is in this way that our creative, communicative exploration continually generates and regenerates the world. We are shaped and informed by what we voluntarily encounter, and we shape what we inhabit as well in that encounter. That is difficult, but the difficulty is not relevant because the alternative is worse.
What's this chapter called again? Right. Be precise in your speech. Maybe writing doesn't count. This comment about regenerating the world reminded me of the thing from Rule 8, tell the truth or at least don't lie, about culture needing updated by the people of the present. I can't really make sense of this otherwise. My script reviewer's stab at it was that you can mold yourself and the environment, and doing the right thing can be hard sometimes, but being a bad person is worse. And if that's what Peterson's getting at, cool, not bad advice. But it would be helpful to have that advice not buried under so much vagueness. This explicit identification of voluntary encounters made me ask if involuntary encounters are exempt. Because I would think that involuntary encounters could impact us as well. Most people don't plan on getting into car accidents or mugged, but those would kinda shape our life, at least for a little bit. I'm not clear on how the difficulty of things relates to encounters, though. I think that the difficulty is with regards to the trouble in confronting uncomfortable truths about ourselves from earlier this chapter, but I'm not totally sure. Maybe it's time for the maybe train. Choo-choo.
Maybe our errant husband ignored the dinner conversation of his wife because he hated his job and was tired and resentful. Maybe he hated his job because his career was forced on him by his father and he was too weak or loyal to object. Maybe she put up with his lack of attention because she believed that forthright objection itself was rude and immoral. Maybe she hated her own father's anger and decided when very young that all aggression and assertiveness were morally wrong. Maybe she thought her husband wouldn't love her if she had any opinions of her own. It is very difficult to put such things in order, but damaged machinery will continue to malfunction if its problems are neither diagnosed nor fixed.
Starting with the positive again. Open and honest communication in relationships with others, especially the more intimate relationships, is important. And it's also important to get that communication flowing again if it breaks down for some reason. My note in the chapter at this point is a very emphatic just fucking talk to each other for fuck's sake, because I may have been a bit frustrated with the chapter at this point. A bit. What is it with dads in this chapter? Just everyone's hypothetical dad messing up their hypothetical adult lives. I'm not trying to be facetious here. How you're treated as a kid by your parents can have long-lasting impacts long after you left their care. But not everything has to be a daddy issue. I want to point out a recurring story beat that's happening here. A person being forced into a career they don't want by their parents. And I'm curious if this is unintentional autobiography popping up again, or something that Peterson saw in enough of his clients. Like, where is this coming from? Because it seems rather specific to be showing up offhandedly on more than one occasion. Lastly, this point that the wife was avoiding things because she believed them to be immoral. Yowza. I'm not going to say that this is impossible, because I'm sure some people attach morality to these sorts of behaviors. But I would refer you back to part 3 for this chapter, where we discuss some potential ramifications of the traditional household model. This seems to go along with that. I joked about video traditions earlier, but we're in the final section of this chapter. So the style-mad flow of consciousness writing that has been the hallmark of these sections is here in full force.
Precision specifies. When something terrible happens, it is precision that separates the unique terrible thing that has actually happened from all the other equally terrible things that might have happened but did not.
Holy shit! The first undeniably precise thing in this chapter on language precision. Let's take a moment and savor this, because it doesn't last. Distilling down his example here of waking up in pain, complete with a whole slew of more maybes and ifs. Maybe it means you're dying, maybe it doesn't. If you don't talk to your doctor about this, that pain could signify any number of possible conditions that would show up on WebMD. If you talk to your doctor, hopefully you can get a diagnosis and start treatment.
What you hear in the forest but cannot see might be a tiger. It might even be a conspiracy of tigers, each hungrier and more vicious than the other, led by a crocodile. But it might not be, too. If you turn and look, perhaps you'll see that it's just a squirrel. I know someone who's actually chased by a squirrel.
Excuse me, Dr. Peterson? A group of tigers would be called an ambush or a streak, not a conspiracy. A group of lemurs would be a conspiracy. It's not a good sign that I'd rather hear more about this guy being chased by the squirrel than the rest of this chapter. We have gotten off the maybe train and onto the often express.
Something is out there in the woods. You know that with certainty. But often it's only a squirrel. If you refuse to look, however, then it's a dragon, and you're no knight. You're a mouse confronting a lion, a rabbit paralyzed by the gaze of a wolf.
Ooh, Schrodinger's squirrel. A superposition of squirrel and dragon states until you check on it.
And I am not saying that it's always a squirrel. Often it's something truly terrible. But even what is terrible in actuality often pales in significance compared to what is terrible in imagination. And often what cannot be confronted because of its horror in imagination can in fact be confronted when reduced to its still admittedly terrible actuality.
Not a bad piece of advice, once you strip away the verbose prose. I think to say it more simply, it would just be a combination of not running away from situations or responsibilities that pop up and trying not to catastrophize things. The often express has connected us to the will line.
If you shirk the responsibility of confronting the unexpected, even when it appears in manageable doses, reality itself will become unsustainably disorganized and chaotic. Then it will grow bigger and swallow all order, all sense, and all predictability. Ignored reality transforms itself, reverts back into the great goddess of chaos, the great reptilian monster of the unknown, the great predatory beast against which mankind has struggled since the dawn of time. If the gap between pretense and reality goes unmentioned, it will widen. You will fall into it, and the consequences will not be good. Ignored reality manifests itself in an abyss of confusion and suffering.
Okay, but what would this look like in real life? This sounds very catastrophic, but a bit overdramatic. What are these not good consequences of falling into this metaphorical abyss?
Be careful with what you tell yourself and others about what you have done, what you are doing, and where you are going.
Why? He does elaborate. Kind of. The style madness makes it a little bit murky on a fraction of what seems to be in this statement, but that leaves a bunch of stuff unexplained. This seems like an iceberg statement, full of implications and potential directives, but he only scratches the surface in elucidating this. Why do we need to be careful? What are some concrete consequences if we aren't, other than a wife being cheated on? Why is this caution needed with others? So many questions.
Search for the correct words. Organize those words into the correct sentences, and those sentences into the correct paragraphs. The past can be redeemed when reduced by precise language to its essence. The present can flow by without robbing the future if its realities are spoken out clearly. With careful thought and language, the singular, stellar destiny that justifies existence can be extracted from the multitude of murky and unpleasant futures that are far more likely to manifest themselves of their own accord. This is how the I and the word make habitable order.
Are we writing an autobiography here? This might just be me, but when I'm talking to somebody, I don't think about what I'm saying in this structured way. I select my words and put them into sentences in a way that feels natural to me and will hopefully be understood by others, but I don't think about the best sentences and the best paragraphs or any of that. And I say that coming from a script I wrote previously, so let's add the little caveat of when I'm talking to somebody not on YouTube. What does this even mean? The what now? I know he's argued that there's no such thing as atheists, but from my perspective, there is no justification for existence. We just are. You can try to do more or less with that, but I don't think that there's some grand design behind life being here. Finally, oh god, the I and the word are teaming up. How many cards until he's got Exodia out? To be precise, that was a trading card game joke.
Don't hide baby monsters under the carpet. They will flourish. They will grow large in the dark. Then, when you least expect it, they will jump out and devour you. You will descend into an indeterminate, confusing hell instead of ascending into the heaven of virtue and clarity. Courageous and truthful words will render your reality simple, pristine, well-defined, and habitable.
Once again, what would any of this look like in real life and not just in metaphor? I know we kind of have a tendency to rag on him for the clean your room thing, but at least that was concrete advice. This is just... I think it's safe to say the baby monsters are the things not being said or dealt with, but what does virtue have to do with this? Why is it paired up with clarity? What would heaven mean in this context? What is a simple, pristine reality? What does it mean for it to be well-defined? Precision, dear doctor. I'm going to bring in my ending experience in grad school here because it's relevant. I was painfully precise about what I wanted, and it got me nowhere. Telling a brick wall that I wasn't going to throw out my dissertation, I wasn't going to not move with my husband, and super no, I'm not going to do the Department of Solid and be an underpaid teacher, didn't change the brick wall's opinion on things. So as truthful and courageous as my words were, it didn't make my reality simple. This is something we'll come back to later, but it seems like this chapter could have been rolled in with the Tell the Truth chapter.
If you identify things with careful attention and language, you bring them forward as viable, obedient objects, detaching them from their underlying near-universal interconnectedness. You simplify them. You make them specific and useful and reduce their complexity. You make it possible to live with them and use them without dying from that complexity, with its attendant uncertainty and anxiety. If you leave things vague, then you'll never know what is one thing and what is another. Everything will bleed into everything else. This makes the world too complex to be managed.
This is probably linking back to the start of the chapter, but some concrete precision in what's meant here would do wonders.
You have to consciously define the topic of a conversation, particularly when it is difficult, or it becomes about everything, and everything is too much. This is so frequently why couples cease communicating. Every argument degenerates into every problem that ever emerged in the past, every problem that exists now, and every terrible thing that is likely to happen in the future.
For most conversations, it seems a bit unnatural and artificial to lay out an agenda for what you're going to talk about. But if you're trying to work out a source of friction in a relationship, going into it with, "This is what I would like to talk about," is a bad advice. Let's see what Peterson suggests before I respond further.
No one can have a discussion about everything. Instead, you can say, "This exact precise thing, this is what is making me unhappy. This exact precise thing, that is what I want as an alternative, although I am open to suggestions if they are specific. This exact precise thing, that is what you could deliver so that I will stop making your life and mine miserable. But to do that, you have to think. What is wrong? Exactly. What do I want? Exactly. You must speak forthrightly and call forth the habitable world from chaos. You must use honest, precise speech to do that. If instead you shrink away and hide, what you are hiding from will transform itself into the giant dragon that lurks under your bed and in your forest and in the dark recesses of your mind, and it will devour you."
Being able to enter a relationship friction conversation knowing what's bothering you and what could be done differently would reduce the scope of the discussion itself. But I don't think this is always a reasonable prerequisite for these types of conversations. As I've said in other videos, I've been married almost 20 years, so there is a full history of things that could have gone better on both sides. And it is absolutely critical to learn how to let things go. And I say that as somebody who has a couple things that will creep back in at inopportune times. Related to that, though, is being able to recognize why that thing from the past is creeping back into mind. This could indicate that a similar pattern is happening, because we are great at recognizing patterns. Maybe a similar behavior or situation is happening, and that could indicate that a previously requested deliverable has been sliding out of place. Sometimes something will be bothering me or my husband at a level that we can't fully articulate yet. And at that point, it's helpful to bring it up to your partner that, hey, something's bothering me, but I don't really know what, and get their input on it. They may have some insight for what's going on. They may see something that you don't. It's okay to have a discussion about this. I do want to point out a slight thing with the word choice that's grabbing my attention. The way Peterson has set this up, it almost sounds like you're holding the relationship hostage in order to fix things. I'll stop making us miserable if you do X. Granted, he does include the opportunity for alternatives as long as they're specific. But this is close to ultimatum territory, which doesn't tend to work well when trying to resolve conflict. And now, a paragraph that reminds me of the ending of Hellsing Ultimate.
You must determine where you have been in your life so that you can know where you are now. If you don't know where you are precisely, then you could be anywhere. Anywhere is too many places to be, and some of those places are very bad. You must determine where you have been in your life, because otherwise you can't get to where you're going. You can't get from point A to point B unless you're already at point A, and if you're just anywhere, the chances you're at point A are very small indeed.
I'm sure I sound like a broken record at this point, but what does this mean exactly? Precise language would be so helpful. This is probably a roundabout way of saying that to get to somewhere, you need to know where you are, whatever space means in this metaphor. I would contend that sometimes you just need to know the end point. To drop into my own metaphor, if you're underwater and you're drowning, you just need to figure out which way's up and start swimming that way. You don't need to know exactly where you are, you just need to know where the air is. And now the mandatory doom spiral.
You must determine where you are going in your life, because you cannot get there unless you move in that direction. Random wandering will not move you forward. It will instead disappoint and frustrate you and make you anxious and unhappy and hard to get along with, and then resentful, and then vengeful, and then worse.
Granted, some people need order and structure in their lives in order to feel okay. Peterson is almost certainly one of these people, but that's not the only way to live life. One of my research assistants was very much not this. Periodically, he would be struck by wanderlust and just go. Figure out how to make things work along the way, but just go on an adventure. And to say he had any sort of navigational points in his life during these periods would just be a lie. But he was happy. He had some amazing experiences that he could have only had by seeing where the wind took him.
Say what you mean so that you can find out what you mean. Act out what you say so you can find out what happens. Then pay attention. Note your errors. Articulate them. Strive to correct them. That is how you discover the meaning of your life. That will protect you from the tragedy of your life. How could it be otherwise?
I am glad that Peterson is calling for his readers to learn from their mistakes and grow as people, but this is not specific enough to show up on those satirical, profound life advice memes. How does one discover the meaning of their life through speaking precisely? How does it protect you against the tragedies of your life? How is it any of this?
Confront the chaos of being. Take aim against a sea of troubles. Specify your destination and chart your course. Admit to what you want. Tell those around you who you are. Narrow and gaze attentively and move forward forthrightly. Be precise in your speech.
So much prose for so little concrete advice. Imprecise to the end. Going back to what I said earlier, I think this chapter should have been rolled in with the Tell the Truth chapter. There are similar themes, as hinted at by my advice being along the same lines for these two chapters. Peterson's ending message is similar. Telling the truth or speaking with precision will improve your life by making life simpler and allows you to progress forward. Although, I admit, 11 Rules for Life and Antidote to Chaos doesn't quite have the same ring to it. You may have noticed the scarcity of paraphrasing in this chapter. That was somewhat by design, somewhat by necessity, because sometimes the best way to show a lack of precision is to show what was written. Leaving out Peterson's object perception framework and the whole laptop obsolescence thing, let's revamp and tune the advice from this chapter. Life doesn't always go to plan. It would probably be boring if it did. But when chaos ensues, you don't have to tackle it alone. Hopefully, you have people in your life who are more than willing to help you. Family, friends, random people on the street. In general, people want to be helpful and help out somebody who needs help, and there is nothing shameful in asking for or accepting that help. Open and honest communication is important. The degree of openness and honesty will vary depending on how well you know the person, but assuming you're in a relationship with that person, don't play games on important stuff. If you want to know why somebody's doing something or saying something, ask them. To borrow Peterson's phrasing, this cuts down on the number of possibilities for why they're doing it to the actual reason. If you don't feel like you can trust the person to tell you openly and honestly, don't ignore that. And it is possible that this person got burned bad in a previous relationship and may have developed trust issues. And if that's the case, it's not your job to help them get through that. You need to know what you're comfortable dealing with and what behaviors you can tolerate to know if this is something that you can help them through and learn to trust again, or if it's something that you can't deal with. Either way, it's fine. Boundaries are boundaries for a reason. But it's also possible that this person has trouble telling the truth. And again, this is something you need to know if you are capable of dealing with or if it's a deal breaker. I've sort of implied it in the last couple points, but an important thing we keep coming back to in this book is this idea of setting up and maintaining boundaries. What are you comfortable with? What are you not comfortable with? How does this mesh with the other person? Is there room for compromise? Is there not? Where are your boundaries? It's okay to be incompatible with the other person. Sometimes things just don't work out between two people, and it's not because either of you are horrifically flawed. Likewise, over time, people can grow together or they can grow apart. Recognizing the apart can be a bit tricky, but if you can catch it, you can have a discussion with your partner about what you want to do about this. Maybe it's just time for you to part ways, or maybe there's things you can do to get close again. But in either case, this doesn't mean that you two weren't communicating effectively during the relationship. If someone chooses to step out on their monogamous partner, the responsibility of that choice is on that person. Laying the blame at the feet of the person who was cheated on, as Peterson did with that hypothetical couple, is fucked up. Finally, being precise in your speech isn't a panacea for your life. It may make some conversations or relationships easier, but selling it as something that will give your life meaning and protect you from tragedy is disingenuous. And that's it for Rule 10. Be precise in your speech. Possibly the most ironically named chapter in this book. YouTube dance. Like, comment, subscribe. You can find me on Twitter, my Discord server, or on Patreon. Links are in the description box. And yeah, see you guys in the next video. Bye!